Historical records show that the practice of keeping concubines thrived in every nook and cranny of the world. In China, this practice was not only widespread, but also considered a crucial part of imperial governance. Let's venture behind the secretive doors of the Forbidden City, owned by the Chinese emperor, to explore the mysteries it conceals. In ancient China, establishments like these were formed with the primary aim of ensuring the continuation of the dynasty's bloodline. To achieve this, the royal family would traverse the breadth of their domain, seeking out the most suitable young women for the role. But one wonders, were there volunteers, and what did it take to earn the protection of the king? The process of selecting potential concubines was notoriously brutal. Candidates underwent a series of rigorous medical examinations and tests to evaluate their education and upbringing. Certainly, there were those who dreamt of a lavish lifestyle, imagining life in the harem as a fairy tale. However, the majority of parents did not desire such a fate for their daughters. Within the walls of their protectors' palaces, concubines faced harsh punishments for misdemeanors and were even at risk of execution. Essentially, they were absorbed into a foreign family, their lives now dictated by the emperor's fleeting attention. After which the concubines were dispatched to the harem, where they were ranked according to their status. From that moment, they were embroiled in a relentless competition for the king's favor. Interestingly, the privilege of having concubines in China was not exclusive to the aristocracy. Even ordinary laborers could have their own concubines. For instance, a blacksmith or craftsman leaving for work in a neighboring town could take on a concubine, a fact officially recognized by society. Despite this, if a common man of the Chinese Empire could afford it, he was still limited to the number of women deemed appropriate. Everyone except the emperor was restricted to just one official wife. Consider the case of a prince's son when his spouse failed to produce an heir. He was permitted to bring one concubine into his household. If by 35, neither woman had blessed him with a son, he could introduce 3 more into his home. For an ordinary laborer who reached 40 without a male heir, seeking a concubine became a necessity, though he was allowed only one, leaving the rest to chance. The foundational purpose of harems was initially for lineage continuation, and only subsequently for leisure and pleasure. For entertainment, there were the WWII troops, groups of young women who sang, danced, and played musical instruments, thereby lightening the mood of their master. The plight of these entertainers was significantly harsher than that of the royal concubines. They were essentially playthings for amusement, to be gifted, sold, or even used as bribes. Passed from one hand to another over the years, they were eventually discarded onto the streets without any means of survival. Returning to the life of a concubine, these young women bore the burden of numerous domestic tasks, which were often grueling. Exceptions were made for those who bore a son to their emperor, but even then, this reprieve was temporary. Frequently, concubines found themselves in families with peculiar tastes. For a touch of horror, consider the story of a young woman who had just given birth to a son. One evening, while she was calmly breastfeeding in her room, her in-laws entered, expressing a desire to taste her breast milk. Such was the curtain call on their bizarre request. This, however, was rooted in the superstitions of the era. It was believed that mother's milk could rejuvenate one's youth. Naturally, the young woman had no right to object to her master's relatives, for doing so could result in her being killed by any member of the royal family, with only a nominal fine as recompense. The most challenging circumstances were faced by girls from impoverished families. They were integrated into the harem as young as 8 years old, becoming not just servants, but often objects of carnal desires. It hardly needs to be said that being born into such a family was far from a fortunate event. Parents were well aware of the grim fate awaiting their child. In such instances, families would seek a wealthy nobleman or merchant in advance, hoping to send their daughter to his household to slightly improve her chances of a somewhat normal life. The most opulent harems, of course, belonged to the emperor, within which a stringent hierarchy was maintained. At the pinnacle was the empress, followed by the ordinary wives, and then the concubines, who were further categorized. Typically, an emperor had 4 wives, symbolizing the 4 seasons and the cardinal directions, while the total number of women in his palace could reach up to 40,000. Emperors abided by certain protocols, shattering stereotypes. For instance, they could visit their empress only once a month, whereas a concubine could expect a visit every 5 days. It was believed that a concubine possessed a more vibrant feminine essence, thereby increasing the likelihood of conceiving a future heir. Yet the intrigue does not end there. The lowest-ranked girls had access to their emperor far more frequently, resulting in situations where such women wielded more influence than senior wives, eventually rising to become future empresses themselves. Now let us share a particularly harrowing tale. Are you prepared? In the distant year of 1368, the Ming dynasty reigned in China, holding power for an extensive 2,776 years. This family was of significant stature, their empire recognized as a true superpower. The emperors of this lineage were renowned for their progressive outlook, promising their people stability and innovation. However, every story has two sides, and the Ming dynasty had its dark aspects. The family's cruelty knew no bounds, unleashing their pent-up rage upon their concubines. The concept of freedom was alien to these women. They were confined to their quarters, with permission to leave only for visits to the emperor's bedroom and back. In ancient China, certain torture practices were rampant. Concubines were bound by their legs, stripped, and carried into the emperor's bedroom, only to be removed after the session had concluded. Only specially trained eunuchs were allowed to interact with the concubines. Emperor Hunu, the dynasty's founder, was a particularly influential ruler. His army expelled Mongolian invaders in 1368, marking a significant triumph. Despite his humble beginnings, Hunu navigated through life's challenges, ascending to a position of power and influence over an entire nation. Hunu established his dynasty, setting a precedent that would be followed by his successors. He maintained a vast number of concubines, and his cruelty was unparalleled, subjecting each woman to torment for the slightest perceived infraction. Essentially, he laid the groundwork for practices that his heirs would continue to uphold. The mistreatment of concubines became normalized. Women were killed, coerced into suicide, and if their master was displeased, they faced dire consequences. Emperor Zhetu later intervened, putting an end to the relentless abuses and outlawing such brutal practices. Following him, Emperor Yunli ascended to power, founding a new capital for China, Beijing, and constructing the new Forbidden City along with the Grand Imperial Palace. Yunli was a forward-thinking emperor, implementing numerous key reforms in military, educational, and economic realms. He shielded his harem from the public eye, but rumors soon spread among the populace about a concubine who had taken her own life due to unrequited love for a eunuch, as the emperor was rumored to be impotent. How did Yunli respond? The magnitude of his decision is staggering. He ordered the execution of all his concubines, an act that involved a significant number of women. Among them was a concubine named Kui, who miraculously was not present during the mass execution. However, she too could not escape retribution in the end. This tragic event is just one of many horrific stories that unfolded behind the closed doors of Chinese harems. As time progressed, rulers came and went, and with them, the regulations governing the lives of concubines evolved. Did these women ever receive kind treatment from their emperors? Were there genuine love stories between a concubine and her king? If you're intrigued and want to learn more, subscribe to our channel and delve into the most fascinating tales of history.